Old growth forests are in decline, and it's becoming increasingly important that we learn how they work so we can better conserve and maintain them in the face of climate change. Often a major component of old growth forests, especially in the Pacific Northwest, are large diameter trees that they die, they create gaps in the canopy, they can tip over, create coarse woody debris or logs on the ground, and there's a very clear connection between seedlings and logs. They create or provide very important seedling establishment opportunities for the future cohort of trees that are growing up into the canopy. And we know that logs can facilitate seedling establishment by providing a cool, shady, moist microclimate that can protect them from droughty summer conditions and direct solar radiation, which can heat up the ground to be really hot and kill them. And we know that seedlings can benefit from growing on top of logs too, because they might be excluded from the ground because of direct competition for light with moss and herbs, and growing on that elevated log surface can help to lessen that direct competition. And so there's a clear connection, but the relative importance of the microclimates and what might influence a seedling to grow on the ground by a log or on top of a log in different forest types is relatively unknown. So what I wanted to do in my study is look at within the Wind River Forest Dynamics plot, the WFDP, which is an old growth forest in the South Washington Cascades. I wanted to see, do logs facilitate seedling establishment? Does moss facilitate or inhibit seedling establishment? And then can you use logs and moss as an indicator or predictor of where you might find seedlings? And then do these relationships change in wet and dry areas? So I found that in the WFDP, there were more and taller conifer seedlings on top of logs than on the forest floor. And the data that I collected of seedling density and log proximity was consistent with my hypothesis that logs facilitate seedling establishment. There seemed to be more seedlings on the ground near logs than away from logs. And then I found that moss cover limited seedling establishment in both wet and dry areas, but the seedlings seemed to have a different relationship to moss height in wet and dry areas. There seemed to be an increasing amount of seedlings with increasing moss height in the wet areas, and then a decreasing amount of seedlings with increasing moss height in dry areas. So my findings suggested that moss might be a better indicator of conifer seedling abundance than logs. And then I also found that the relationship seedlings might have with logs and moss might be different depending on the limiting pressures, like moisture and dry areas, or maybe light and wet areas of the WFDP.